We're talking about The Sopranos today, and this evening is fitting for it. A little while ago, I made a Scooby Doo ass sandwich with the red wine vinegar, with the olive oil, with the provolone, with the salami, with the shitty bar ass ham, which is shitty but is inexpensive. And now I'm taking sips of vodka, but not drinking it because I don't want to get drunk. But my body, my heart rate, rather, is also demanding some form of alcohol for some reason I can't put my finger on. I don't love The Sopranos. I don't know it well enough to love it. I haven't known it long enough. I haven't had feelings for it long enough. I haven't been with it long enough to get nostalgic, which I think is when real love kicks in, when you get to a point you can be warmly, lovingly nostalgic about someone or something. This isn't love. This isn't a love letter. This is a lust text. I'm a newcomer to the series. I'm a little over halfway through season one, and I am horny for this show. In a year or two, I will probably recognize its flaws. I will probably see it for what it really is, whatever that may be. But for now, this show speaks to me. It represents everything I think I want it to represent or want a show to represent. And in these throes of passion, I feel like I get it and it gets me. Now I understand or think I understand why people like it so much. I stayed away from it for a long time because for years now the fan base has been esoteric. Has been esoteric. And a lot of people will talk about the show or parts of the show they like, but for me, there hasn't been that unifying thing, that singular why, like the singularity in a black hole that draws you in and won't let you escape. However, between a bunch of spoilers and memes and now my actually sitting down and watching it, I think I get it. You aren't watching The Sopranos for action or for comedy or for interesting storylines. It has all these things, but the reason you go to it, and it seems like lots of people return to it, The Sopranos presents life as it is, as you experience it, and invites you to think about it and to feel about it. It is, ironically, probably not accidentally, like a self therapy session through media, which is what the best media is to begin with. Firstly, it doesn't lie to you. It's actually like Cowboy Bebop in that way. It shows you familiar aspects of life, people, places, situations about people in places, but it bucks the the social scripts we are trained to follow and to think in, but don't feel in, and certainly don't live in. People who do good aren't always rewarded. People who do bad aren't always punished. And most of the time, true to life, there is not really any narrative or overarching narrative structure. Shit happens, people deal with the shit happening, and maybe you get a resolution, maybe you don't. Probably you don't. And now what? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about spending 2 years preparing for A and then B happening for reasons you could not possibly foresee? Or you have a feeling you've been trained not to feel, maybe even think you shouldn't feel, but you feel it anyway. And there isn't any way to do anything about it. You just feel this damned thing you're stuck with. And it will have consequences, and you just have to live with them. How do you feel about that? How do different people react to those situations? How does one person going through one of these things interact with other people, normal people, quotes? And this is what I'm talking about. With The Sopranos, I catch myself doing something I haven't done with any piece of media, or at least this much with any piece of media, in quite some time. Needing to pause a scene and think about it. What's happening in this scene might not be exactly something you've dealt with, but it's probably close. And it's probably close because the feelings this person is feeling, whatever person is feeling, in response to what's happening, is exactly something you have felt. So you pause it and you think about how you felt in this situation. Why did you feel this way? What happened, or what did you do, and what happened after you did what you did? And then you press play and watch how this person deals with something you have felt. And they feel like people because they're completely irrational, but not completely irrational, because there's some logic to what they're doing, but maybe their logic is fucked up. Maybe it's fucked up in a way you're familiar with. Maybe it's fucked up in a way you haven't thought about. Pause, think about that. And it really isn't just the situations. We define ourselves, our identities, our egos, via contrasts. So if a character responds to something you have felt in a way you wouldn't, or in a bad way, quotes a bad way, you start thinking about why they did it differently. What are the consequences of their doing it differently? And if it's a bad outcome, you'll catch yourself teaching yourself life lessons by watching these people. Because that's the benefit of writing characters and the world as honestly as possible. Maybe a character's reaction to a situation is not something, quotes, bad or completely different from what you would do. Maybe it's exactly what you would do. Tony Soprano is literally you. But then when he does something positive in a more typical fantasized feel-good story a character would be rewarded for, they get kicked in the balls for trying to do something positive. I'm sure you've been there. How do you feel about that? When something like this happens, do you have the tenacity to continue trying to do the positive thing? Like season 1 Tony sometimes does. Or do you feel guilty because you wouldn't? You know you don't have the tenacity to keep trying to do something good after you've been punished for it. Or should you continue trying to do good things knowing you won't be rewarded for them? The Sopranos doesn't say yes you should. It doesn't give you any answers. It shows you the facts. It's not trying to instruct you. It leaves you to draw your own conclusions. And some people would argue, well, some of the shit in this show is so terrible it can't not be instructing you, but real life is full of terrible shit, and you are not a saint. It shows you a bunch of good things and bad things that are probably uncomfortably relatable, and then leaves you to figure out how the scales even out, or if they're even close to evening out. In one of the earlier episodes, Tony admits to Meadow he's in the Mafia. She thanks him for that honesty, appreciates it by being honest, uncomfortably honest, in kind. And then, 2 minutes later, Tony lies about the severity of what being in the Mafia means to protect her. Has he betrayed her trust? Well, yeah, but it's for a good reason. But is it a good enough reason to justify betraying trust? I lie to my mother about my father and Mai's relationship. I do it because I know our relationship makes her feel powerless. And it just makes her miserable. So I view dealing with these hard feelings alone my burden to bear. Something I do for my mother. A favor to her because I love her. That doesn't change the fact that I'm lying, and from one point of view might be denying her the opportunity to try to help. I'm not allowing her that opportunity to help her son. Am I being selfish here? Am I doubling her feeling of powerlessness? Am I dealing a tremendous blow to her self-esteem by suggesting she doesn't have the makings of a varsity mediator? We're in the memes now. I don't think I've been totally initiated into the cult yet, but we're getting there. Next time I get to a deli, I'll be buying a bunch of gabagool. I don't know. But The Sopranos invited me to think about it by showing me a similar situation and then not lecturing me. That's one of the reasons I never really got into Breaking Bad. Or even Mad Men as much, even though I like that show. Mad Men is surprisingly good for image training. That sounds like it would be a joke. It isn't. The Sopranos hit you with the realest reality checks and then stares at you, like Dr. Melfi. Another example, I was in therapy for a good while, until my health insurance. Luigi did nothing wrong. But when Tony came on to Melfi, it made me think about my time in therapy. Now, I didn't come on to my therapist, I didn't feel that kind of connection with her, but I did feel a weird, unacknowledged connection. I have I've acknowledged it before, but I still feel embarrassed about acknowledging it. One of my paternal aunts was a very, or is still a very positive figure in my life, but we barely talk. This therapist I was working with was a lot like my aunt, both in appearance and in demeanor. She's like a football coach or something. Straightforward, practical, and systematized, strategic way of doing things. You'll probably never fix this gaping wound in your soul, but you can manage it. And here's how. I'll help you. And I grew embarrassed because I stopped thinking about my therapist as a therapist, but as an aunt. And when my health insurance did what it did, she was still very cool about it, very helpful, apologetic, and she gave me a "your brain isn't broken" certificate for legal purposes. Thank God. But I was left with this feeling of I'm paying, or I was paying, someone to fulfill a familial role in my life. What is that? What do I do about that? Okay, I feel embarrassed. Why do I feel embarrassed? Because I developed a personal attachment to someone working on a professional level. I feel embarrassed because I feel I shouldn't feel this way. But is it a bad thing to feel? If it is, why? And why did you feel that way? And if it isn't, then what is it and what do you do about that? Why do you feel ashamed or guilty of feeling that way if you if it's an okay thing to feel? And who are you supposed to ask about this? The person you can no longer afford to presumably or superficially operate on a professional level, but is actually operating in and doing most of the work in a pseudo familial role, who is doing that for money, which is not a bad thing. And then on that note, I haven't gotten this far in the show, but I watched an edit with it in there. If none of this matters, then why do I have to think about it? And this is why the honesty of The Sopranos is striking to me. It doesn't just present the facets of life we agree are important as honest, it also presents the facets of life we either disagree about or maybe feel embarrassed to acknowledge are important, i.e., dreams and spirituality. I was under the impression there were only 2 or 3 major dreams in the show. As it turns out, dreams, even small ones, come up pretty constantly. And we talk a lot about dreams on this channel. The supernatural, the unconscious. Fascinating. Why don't you just stop thinking about this thing you don't want to think about or can't make any progress on? You keep working on it on a conscious level or toiling over it on a conscious level because if you try to repress it, it will find you in your dreams. If this is something that matters to you, your unconscious will not let you drop it until you've gotten somewhere with it, and you don't know where you're supposed to get with it. But all you know is that you can't repress it, because if you do, it'll haunt you. And why does it haunt you? Or why do you need to think about these things? Or why do you need to interpret your unconscious as something you need to think about? Because on some level, everybody is concerned with what comes next. Even if that concern is reflecting on and trying to prove nothing comes next. Even if you say there's nothing, you still think about it a lot. And for the more spiritual of us, when you encounter these damned little things that just will not go away, and why is it this stupid thing when it could be any one of the millions of others, you have this terrible suspicion there is a spiritual or higher level or supernatural reason this thing won't let you go. So you need to work on it. Which is exactly what a number of the characters in the show go through. Again, I haven't gotten there watching the show. I have watched hours and hours and hours of videos about the show because damn do I love a good spoiler. For me, I mean, I don't go out seeking spoilers necessarily, but when you know the way events are going to play out, you can pay more attention to why they play out that way. Example, I finished listening to the Godfather audiobook a while ago, and I started listening to it again, and Puzo actually explains why Vito takes insults. It's subtle. It's a blink and you miss it thing. I missed it the first time. The reason is not because Vito is the bigger man who can turn the other cheek. It is specifically because the best time, the most opportune moment to repay an insult brutally is not the moment you receive it. So Vito is not being this hyper-moral guy or this man who's above insults. He gets payback, but he does it when the time is right. And I bring that up because that's something, that's a detail I would not have caught if I weren't paying attention to the way things were playing out, which is why I missed it the first time. Which is why I don't mind knowing the way The Sopranos turns out, because it affords me more attention to think about shit and notice things. So then, how do you make progress on these things you can't make any more progress on by yourself? Well, you need other examples of people dealing with this stuff to contrast your experience against, so you can, by parallax, try to figure out what you're feeling or what you need to do. And where do you go to get those contrasts? You go to The Sopranos. It's Tony's all the way down. Tony is as above as he is so below. I am twitching in lust about how good this show is. And again, I am sure when I'm done with the show, maybe done with a second rewatch, a few years from now, I will look and feel about this show differently. But for right now, holy shit. Why is this sort of inviting, reflective media so rare? So much media wants to tell you a story. The Sopranos wants to help you tell your story by showing you literally you, or literally not you. Okay, we'll cut it here because I'm going to start babbling if I don't, but wow. Wow, wow, wow. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.